We are continuing the course, Overcoming the Darkness, a Christian Response to the Cults, False Religions, and the Occult. And we are finishing up Part 2, Historical Heresies today. And it's important to understand that all historical heresies have been a deliberate attempt to modify Orthodox Christianity. Many people try to prove it through theological arguments, but historically what you would notice is that many of these heresies evolved out of personal conflicts between different teachers, different theologians, different leaders of different churches in the first 3 centuries of the church. And that's very important to recognize because it's repeated again in many of the cults today. Also, it's important to realize that when the early centuries of the church were evolving, they were trying to understand who Jesus was. How do you mix a human with the divine? Is it even possible? And what's interesting, most of the false religions and cults simply repeat the same old heresies that you'll learn in the book, or they add a new dimension to it, which is simply changing the original heresy. Now, let me go through some of the particular historical heresies, but you can read it through the chapter, Part 2. Concerning God, there were some people who believed that God was everything. He was everywhere. That's called pantheism. And then you had polytheism, that there were many gods. That's why the struggle with the Trinity is that many people couldn't believe that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were 3 persons, 3 gods in one. They were actually 3 separate gods. Or you had dualism, where there were actually 2 distinct forces, one evil, one righteous, God and Satan fighting against each other with equal power, and who would win. And so there were multiple other heresies about God, and it's important to study those. Then there were multiple heresies about Jesus Christ. The Ebionites, in the early part of the church history, they denied that Christ was divine because they couldn't believe God would mix the material, the human, with the divine. It just seemed to be an impossible thing. Then you had the Gnostics, and the word Gnostic in Greek simply means knowledge. They denied the full humanity of Christ, and they thought that simply his body was a phantom, and that people really didn't see a body. They saw what probably they would call a ghost today. And then there were the Arians. They didn't believe that Jesus pre-existed, that he was in fact created. And that's one of the repetitive heresies today in the Mormon Church and so forth. And there are many other heresies concerning Jesus that you can read in the book. There were some historical heresies concerning the Holy Spirit, not too many. For example, some believe the Holy Spirit was merely energy or a force or some type of influence, but not an actual person or the third person in the Godhead. And some believe that he was actually created by the Son, and you can read the other heresies as well. Then there were many heresies concerning the Trinity, and this is one of the more unique struggles that many of the early church believers and the early church fathers had. Sanbellianism, they believe the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit were simply 3 manifestations, 3 separate manifestations of the same one God. And for example, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a son. And that's how they would see it. Different manifestations, but only one God. And then there were also the Arians. The Arians were involved in multiple heresies, and they believed there was only one eternal person, not 3 persons in the Godhead. And that interestingly, they believed that Jesus was a super angelic being, and that the Holy Spirit was first created and was the greatest creature created by Jesus himself. So the Arians really mixed up the whole concept of the Trinity. And then you had tritheism. That's basically there are 3 separate gods without unity. They function independently of one another, and that they carry on their activities as 3 separate persons. Now, in the next session, we're going to deal with another number of heresies concerning sin, salvation, faith, sacred writings, and so forth. So continue for the next session.